Ever feel like you're doing this teaching thing alone? You don't have to be. Shared teaching is all about sharing the workload through the power of collaboration and teamwork. Together, we'll walk through all the difficult parts of teaching and learn how to streamline our processes, fine-tune our time management, and develop a more manageable workload. If that sounds like a dream come true to you, then welcome to the Shared Teaching Podcast. Let's share in the teaching to make those dreams a reality. Now here's today's Shared Teaching. Hello and welcome back to the Shared Teaching Podcast. I'm your host, Susan, and today we have a very special guest with us today, my longtime friend and previous coworker, Lisa Parnello, who is now a dyslexia expert with over 18 years of experience in public and private schools, where she focused on students with learning differences such as dyslexia and dysgraphia. She now provides one-on-one dyslexia therapy support, and she also helps with parents and educators through online courses and her Dyslexia Devoted podcast. Thank you, Lisa, for being on the show.
Hello, and it's so good to see you. For those of you who don't know, we've known each other for many years, since our very beginning of our teaching careers, so it is so nice to be here with you in a whole new context.
I know, it's so nice to reconnect. So I know that you've become quite interested and really have devoted your entire time to dyslexia. So can you tell us just a little about what you do now and how you're supporting teachers and students?
Absolutely. I used to be the lower school director of a school for kids with learning differences and dyslexia. And in case any of you have ever been a director or not been one, no one goes to you when they're happy. They are all about when something goes wrong. And really what brings me true joy is working directly with kids. So I was a trainer to train teachers to help kids with dyslexia, as well as the one that would work directly with the kids with the most severe dyslexia. So I took all the favorite parts of my job and gave myself my own job. So I run my own business doing one-on-one dyslexia therapy with kids, and that is the core part of it. And then on the side, to keep helping educators and parents learn more about dyslexia and learning differences, I have my Dyslexia Devoted podcast that has short little episodes every week. And then I also do courses online for parents and educators to learn more about dyslexia.
And of course, we'll share all that information at the very end of the show, as well as in the show notes. So I am so excited to talk with you today because, first of all, it's been years. We won't tell anyone how many years.
Nope, no one needs to hear that.
I got a lot of gray hairs, but it's been that many.
There might be a few here or two.
Right? But I thought we would start with just defining what is dyslexia. Let's do like a little crash 101 course here.
Of course. It is a language-based learning difference, which means it affects all elements of language, both spoken and written and reading. And so it is characterized usually by a lack of phonological awareness and the struggle and labored reading that comes with it. And it usually means that their brain is wired differently. And it can be caused by two different things. Most of the time it is hereditary, so it runs in families. Sometimes it can be caused by brain injury as well, which is actually how they discovered that dyslexia is not a vision problem, which is a huge misnomer. A lot of people think it's seeing letters backwards, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with vision of people with dyslexia. And it is often more characterized by the fact that their brain is wired differently, so they take a longer pathway when they are trying to figure out language-based information.
I did not know that it could be genetic, so that's really interesting. So
yeah,
I learned something new 1 minute in.
Yeah, there we go. And it comes in phases. So sometimes it might skip a generation, or one person might be really bad in spelling and somebody else might be bad in reading. And a lot of the times I actually have my clients' parents be like, oh my goodness, I had all these same struggles in school. I think they got their dyslexia from me. And so it was not something that was diagnosed very often. People just thought they were bad at school or bad at reading or they were dumb or something. And really it was just undiagnosed dyslexia that a lot of parents find out now when their kids are struggling and they get help. They go, oh my goodness, that was me as a child. And they find out that they themselves had dyslexia as well. And it's also up to 1 in 5. So I've met teachers who think they've never had a kid with dyslexia. And I can guarantee you have at least 2 or 3 in your class right now, and you probably just don't know it.
Wow. I was going to ask you what the percentage is. That's pretty scary, actually, 1 in 5, especially considering that none of us have any training on it. whatsoever.
Yes.
Like, I don't even think our college classes touched on it.
I think I had like one paragraph.
Right? Yeah, same.
There's like one or two paragraphs of like, here are some of the specific learning disabilities that might be in your class. But ironically, specific learning disability is not specific at all and doesn't tell you what to do with any of them. It's actually why it has become my mission to do my podcast and online courses for all the things I wish I learned in teacher training. I had 2 different credentials, one in elementary ed, one in special ed. Neither one taught me how I help kids today.
Which is crazy. Which
Absolutely.
just shows you how they really need to revamp those teacher programs, because I feel the same way with writing. Like, no one ever talks about writing. No one ever talks about dyslexia. So we're the same, my friend, just trying to do our best to help everyone else out there.
And when you know better, you do better. So we're spreading the word.
So what are some signs maybe that we're looking for to see those 1 in 5 that are in our classroom?
One of the biggest ones is phonological awareness. So kids who can't rhyme, kids who miss sounds within words. So like in writing specifically, you'll usually see they're missing a lot of letters. So like if they're writing the word sprint, they'll have like an S, an R, and a T or something like that. They'll have part of the letters, but not all of them. That lack of phonemic awareness is usually a really big indicator. I also love telling people about the things that they don't realize are associated with dyslexia. So really poor executive functioning, so organizational skills. So seeing their backpack exploding, not having time management, their desk is a complete mess, they did their homework but forgot to turn it in. And ADHD is also highly correlated to dyslexia. While they don't have to go hand in hand, it is very, very common for a kid with dyslexia to also have ADHD. And left-handedness is also an interesting little correlation. When I taught a class of 25, I might have 1 or 2 kids who were left-handed. When I taught a class of kids with dyslexia, I'd have like 4 or 5 out of my 10 to 12 kids in my class would be left-handed.
Interesting. That's crazy. So as you're saying this, I'm picturing all these kids. I'm like, oh, exploding desk, check. Missing sounds, check. ADHD, double check. But what age would you say? Because, I mean, there's some students that they're still struggling with those letter names and sounds, like even in 2nd grade. So that can't just be yes, they definitely have dyslexia that we want teachers to pay attention to. It's a pretty high indicator, though.
If it is a student who's gotten intervention and people have tried teaching them their letters and sounds, that's actually one of the first signs is kids who are slow to learn their letter names and letter sounds. And so you can actually notice as early as preschool and kindergarten which kids are falling behind everybody else in learning their letter names and letter sounds and things like that. So it's actually a really high indicator, unless there's some other barrier like severe ADHD that can be just severe ADHD where the child didn't have the medication that they needed to focus, or they were overstimulated, or sometimes lack of educational instruction, kids who were really sick, or, COVID times when they weren't actually in an actual classroom. And so there are a few other indicators, but if a child still doesn't know all their sounds by 2nd grade, that's actually a pretty massive indicator.
Okay, so we're talking the student has had RTI and interventions, and then they're still missing those sounds, and then we're going to say, okay, maybe they need to be referred.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. And then often in private evaluations, kids can get diagnosed with dyslexia as early as 1st grade, but you will almost never get that in elementary school in a normal public school because they have to show that longer deficit. A lot of times, most schools require them to be 1.5 years, 2 years behind before they will diagnose. And that's where parents think their child doesn't have dyslexia when really it just means they don't qualify for services. And that's why so many of us teachers don't know our kids have dyslexia because, we put through the IEP process and it says they don't qualify. And there's a really big difference between not qualifying for services and not having a learning difference. Those are 2 completely different questions. Okay. And that's where a lot of things go wrong. Teachers are like, well, we did that and it says they don't qualify, so they must not have anything wrong. They just might need some extra help. When really they aren't required to receive federal funding to get paid to do those interventions. It's not that they don't have a learning difference.
So the teacher that gets back the they're not qualified statement, what do they do next? Like, what is their steps?
That would be to do the interventions even if they don't have a diagnosis. I actually don't require kids to have a diagnosis to come to me. And it's teaching them phonemic awareness, teaching them how to use Elkin boxes or some other form to tap out the sounds in the word, to teach them how to hear all the sounds in the word and stretching them out slower so they can hear each individual sound. being able to give them that explicit instruction of like, here's the different ways we spell O, and here's where you might find them. So if you're writing, for example, you can teach them what says O. Okay, well, it could be O with a silent E. It could be O by itself, like in the word go. It could be OA. It could be OE. It could be OW. And showing them where might you find one. Like, I'm probably not going to have OA at the end of a word, except for random weird words like cocoa. And that actually is because it comes from another language. And so when we think about helping kids, it's really showing them really explicitly, here are the patterns that spell this sound, and here's where you're most likely to find them. Here's your most likely option. And so if there's 4 different ways to spell it, realistically, only 2 of them would make sense where it is in the word.
So teaching all those spelling rules. And then when you're saying that, I'm picturing sound walls. So that trend towards sound walls is actually really beneficial towards dyslexic students.
No, it definitely is. But okay. I feel like I have some, I've got some hot takes on some of it. Is I find sound walls creepy as all heck. Seeing a bunch of mouths on the wall, I find terrifying. And I know kids who also find it equally creepy. So I like the idea of a sound wall and knowing all of the sound options posted on the wall. And whereas having the actual mouths on the wall is a little, I don't know. It freaks me out, to be honest. And I know a lot of kids are like, they're making all these weird faces at me. And so I do actually teach the kids with my actual mouth what it looks like to make that sound. So I'm all for using mouth, gestures to be able to show them, like, when I say the short E sound, it's more of a smile than if I say the short I sound and it has like not so smiley of a lips. But I also don't really like putting them on the walls. But I do validate, for sure, teaching the kids that the different sounds do make different shapes, because some kids can't hear the difference, but they can feel the difference. So, like, if you think of, like, the B versus the V, like B versus V, you can teach them that their teeth touch their lips when they make the V sound. So if they can't really hear the difference, or they can put their hand on their throat to feel the difference between an F versus a V. Like, if you don't feel your vocal cords move, then it's an F. But if you do feel your vocal cords, then it's a V for the same mouth shape. So I do absolutely validate the being able to use tactile things to teach the kids different sounds if they can't hear the sounds naturally on their own very easily, and they can use visual cues. But I also really don't like the mouths on the wall.
That's so interesting, because when I had a sound wall when I taught second, I didn't put the mouths up either, but I didn't really think into why. I just was like, I don't like those. But I never knew students found it creepy. I can totally see that.
Yeah. So, and it's one of those ones where if it doesn't have to make the whole class creeped out, but if even 2 or 3 kids are constantly thinking about these mouths, looking at them on the wall, they're not listening to you anymore because they're just paying attention to this thing on the wall.
Right. Which totally makes sense, because I'm thinking the ADHD kids, and of course they're looking, yeah. So
yeah. Interesting.
So, hey, teachers, if you have a sound wall, you might want to consider covering up the mouths and seeing if that makes a difference to behaviors.
And I totally will show the kids with my mouth. And the kids have made comments to me. They're like, I do know I can kind of read lips now because I'm so used to looking at the mouth for the different mouth shapes. So I think it's really important, but the pictures of them themselves kind of weird me out.
Right. Oh my gosh. That's so interesting. Okay. So we have these students. We can pull them in small groups. We can work on the sounds with them too. What, as a teacher, is if we notice these issues and we're working on the student and we've tried the IEP process, or maybe we haven't, I'm trying to think as a new teacher, how do I know where to go, where to get help, even what to say? So a lot of districts have similar policies. So can you kind of touch upon what's your path once you have one of these students in your class you're concerned about?
There's a few different things. One is it's really hard when you're not allowed to tell parents to go somewhere else to get tested.
True.
So that is really challenging. I luckily was in private schools where we never had those rules, but there's different places you can look. If you're curious about just different strategies, my podcast has over 100 episodes of different things you can, learn about specific things. Understood.org has a lot of great resources, and they have templates. So maybe if you can just point parents in the direction of Understood.org, they can coincidentally bump into a few things that teach them how to write the formal letters requesting things, like an IEE, so an external evaluation when you don't agree with the school's evaluation. International Dyslexia Association has a ton of resources. There is an Orton Gillingham-based program, IMSE, I'm sure it stands for something, but I can't remember what it is. I just call it IMSE. And they have a ton of resources that are actually really affordable for teachers in order to start utilizing certain strategies. And Orton Gillingham is kind of like the godfather of all things dyslexia instruction, for those of you who don't already know. And so any of the Orton Gillingham based programs are really helpful in order getting a little bit more help that way. And it is really tricky to try to navigate the school system and what they allow or don't allow in different schools to tell parents on what to ask for. And maybe just telling the parents, like, your child doesn't qualify for services, but I do think this is something you should keep an eye on and see if you can get outside support. So, trying to stay within the bounds of whatever will get you in trouble at your school, but telling the parent of, like, just because they don't qualify for services here at school does not mean they probably don't need a little bit more support. It just means by law, we're not required to help them.
Right.
Which is really sad.
It is. Oh my gosh. Okay. So you talked a little bit about some of the misconceptions of dyslexia. Are there some other ones out there that we haven't heard of or we just don't know about?
The biggest one is just always people thinking the letters backwards is always, the big problem, when really sometimes they just need formal instruction of, like, this is the direction it goes. You will also see in writing, since I know that's a lot of your focus, is being able to do bottom-up letters. And that's often a lot of kids with dyslexia will do a lot of writing from the bottom up. So teaching them to go from the top down is actually a lot of things that the kids need, is that formal instruction on how do we properly write letters. Oh, I'm supposed to start at the top, not start down at the bottom on the line. So they need more of that formal instruction on actual handwriting. The biggest thing is vision. So many people think dyslexia is all about vision and needing vision therapy, and vision therapy does not help. Special fonts do not teach a child to read, so the special dyslexia font does not actually increase accuracy. And it is one of those things where a lot of people give all of these strategies that are really all about vision when that's not the issue at all. And it's really about needing really explicit instruction as to, here are the way letters work, here's the rules behind them, here's why we do it this way. And a lot of times kids with dyslexia see the big picture, but they miss those little details. So we have to give them those little details. And you'll see it a lot in writing too, where their thoughts are all over the place and there's not really any organized structure. So you need to give them really explicit instruction, like first we start with a topic sentence, then we give a detail, then we explain it some more, and then we give a new detail, then we explain that some more. And then at the very end, we say it all over again and repeat our main point. And but unless someone tells them that, they won't just do that. They'll just write all their ideas in circles. And they will give, the bare minimum sometimes. And they're like, isn't that enough? And they have to see what does done look like. And having to show them, like, this is what it should look like when it's done. Because they won't just, intuitively figure that out.
Right. And I feel like that's just a key point of having good writing instruction, is having those models too. Because you do want to model for them, but you also want to have the example and maybe a rubric so they can see exactly what they're supposed to have.
Exactly. And that's the thing for dyslexia. What is essential instruction for kids with dyslexia is good instruction for all kids. Following the science of reading, following, really explicit, direct instruction. And, this kid just learns by movement. Actually, that doesn't actually teach them how to do certain things. They need really concrete examples and very clear instruction. And so really being a really good teacher helps even the kids with dyslexia.
So I want to go back to the fonts and writing the letters from the bottom up, because I've noticed since COVID, there's an explosion of that.
Oh my God, I want to die. I have so many kids I've actually taught cursive, because by fifth grade, they were in COVID lockdown during kindergarten, first, second, and none of them can form letters. Now they're in fifth grade going into middle school. And I actually taught a ton of them just cursive because it was so hard to break their habits from what they badly learned to do during COVID lockdowns. And that a lot of it is literally one little boy, I literally just told him you have to write all your letters from the top down, and instantly his writing looked better. Okay. Because when you go from the bottom up, they just kind of scroll into the next letter versus it's very, you have to make more of a conscious effort. And that is really the hardest thing as kids get older, is you have to force them to make a conscious effort when really you're breaking a habit they've had for 5 or 10 years.
Right.
And so that's really hard. Think about anything you've done the same way for 5 years. How hard of a habit is that to break? So you have to teach them certain conscious things to do it that way.
Now, I know when I was in school, and probably when you were in school too, we actually had formal handwriting lessons. And why do they not do that anymore? Why is that just not even a thing?
I think so many people think that, they're just going to type everything anyway. They're always going to use technology. And that's actually becoming a downfall, because there's actually certain schools around here that forced the kids to do handwritten work again in high school because of ChatGPT. Kids have found other ways to try to cheat, so they make them all write it by hand, which they haven't really thought that through because you can just copy what ChatGPT wrote on your screen. But, don't even get me started. Like, there's a flaw in their plan, and it is actually killing my soul as an educator with kids with dyslexia, is because all of these accommodations, there's kids who are not allowed to use their accommodations now. Like, one of the girls is like, I can't copy paste it. I have to write it by hand. The teacher will yell at me if I copy paste anything. Which, if you're a kid with dyslexia, copying a name that has based in a foreign language, they're commonly will make mistakes just transposing it from one place to another. And she's like, no, I'll get in trouble. I can't do that. I have to write it by hand.
Wow.
So there's definitely certain downsides to the advancements in technology, and what schools have done to try to overcome it sometimes actually harms kids with learning differences because it makes it harder to use their accommodations.
Clearly in elementary school, we don't see a lot of those issues. So that's interesting to hear about going forward.
I'm in the tech-focused Bay Area of California, so we see a lot of our kids are a little extra tech savvy more than the average bear a lot of times, just because their parents develop the software to begin with.
Right. Gosh, they can come teach my class because all my kids are like, I want to learn how to build an app. And I'm like, I know nothing. We know how to kind of find any issues and then start working with students. How long do you think the students need to see work with them to see results? Because I know in IEP terms, they're always try this intervention for 6 weeks. And then if it doesn't work. So is it similar when you're working with dyslexic students that we have that kind of timetable?
I actually refuse to give parents a timetable. It takes as long as it takes. I have a sequence of skills that are taught in order because one skill builds on the next one. And so it's a series of phonics skills. And once you master this one, then we go to the next one. Then you master this one, then we go to the next one. So it's not a finite amount of time. It is a finite list of skills. When you can read short vowels, then we'll read 2-syllable words with short vowels. When you can read those ones, then we'll move to, words with silent E, and then combine those in with words with short vowels. So pancake, where it's got, a short vowel and a long vowel. And then once they can do that, then we'll move on to another pattern. And so it's a series of skills that builds on each other, and it takes as long as it takes. I've got some kids where I work on the same skill for 3 months. But once they get there and they build those really strong foundations, then they can do amazing things. And I think that's part of the problem is the interventions that work for dyslexia take time, and schools want quick, fast results. True. And if it isn't fast enough, then we're just not going to do that program anymore. Not that it isn't effective, it's that it's not effective on the timetable we want it to be. But kids don't come with a timetable. I've had a few kids that try to go to this other very expensive tutoring center and say, well, they said it would take 200 hours. And I said, each kid's different. I have no idea how many hours it's going to take you. I'm not trying to take your money. It's just one of those it takes what it takes. Some kids I can see in 9 months and they're good to go once they know how letters and phonics works because their school just didn't teach phonics. And other times the kid's severely dyslexic and it takes me 3 years. So I think that's really the thing is, they want these fast, quick results that by the end of the year, this kid's going to be on grade level when that's not really realistic if a kid is 3 years behind. They're not going to just magically be on grade level by the end of the year.
So is it kind of like when kids first pick up reading and you see that aha moment when you start working with them?
Sometimes, for sure. Some kids, it's really quick and they get that aha moment. Some kids, I feel like I'm pulling teeth. It takes me months to get them to just read a 3-letter word correctly if they're severely dyslexic. But there are definitely ones where oh my goodness, it's all coming together. And the parents will be like, do you know they read street signs on the way here today? And it's really great when they can finally do things. One little girl, she left me a note one day. And that was really huge because she couldn't read before. And yet she started using written communication because she borrowed, I have this little reader pen that I was using at the school, not for me, but for the kids. And so she left me a note saying, I took the reader pen. I'm in Mr. So-and-so's class if you need it. And for her to be able to leave a note communicating something of her own volition was actually the huge aha moment to me that we'd made progress because I was a 5th grader who still couldn't read. She'd been retained twice, and retention does not teach kids how to read. It's using the same bad program that didn't work the first time all over again. So it still didn't work the second time. And I think that's the big thing is that a lot of times kids get retained. So then they're, 2 years older than their classmates, but they still can't do anything because no one taught them how to read. They just put them in the same thing that didn't work.
Right. Aw, I teach your heart.
Yeah, exactly.
When you're talking about you have a set system you move through, Should our first step be a phonics screener? Because I know I used to phonics screen all of my class.
Always, for sure. Absolutely. That's actually what I do. It's the first thing I do with every single kid. It's called the WIST is the one that I use. It's the word identification and spelling test. I can do one kid in about 40 minutes. So that's always the first session with every kid I see. So it shows me exactly which sounds they do and don't know, both in isolation and within words for both reading and spelling. And that's actually the very first thing I do is see which phonics skills they do or don't have. Because if you don't have those skills, then you obviously can't read. Or you can read based on context clues, but as soon as you're reading something about a new subject you've never heard about, you can't read it anymore because you don't have context clues because you've never read about the subject. Or if you used to look at the pictures, once there's no pictures anymore, then they don't know how to figure it out. So I actually don't even teach kids with books with pictures. All of my writing things that they have no pictures at all.
Interesting. It makes sense now that you're saying it, but I'm like, oh yeah, I guess that would.
Kids are smarter than you think they are, and they will just look at the pictures and guess and look like they know how to read stuff. When, like, if I see the cow, I see the tree, I see the elephant, and they see a picture of an elephant, they know that word means elephant. But if you just handed them an exact same word on a piece of paper, they couldn't read it. And so I take away anything that could give them bad strategies like guessing, because it's a really hard habit to break once kids get used to guessing it all the time, because clever kids can guess it right most of the time. As soon as you take away some of those things that help them, like, give them a new story in 4th grade history class and they've never heard about any of these people or what's happening, and there's no pictures to look at, then suddenly they can't read anymore when really they couldn't read to begin with. It just looked like they could.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense, because I'm sure we're all picturing somebody in our class that we've noticed that with, or you're like, well, how do you get it here? And then you don't get it again. So
yeah,
now I'm having a light bulb moment. I'm like, oh,
good.
Good. Totally makes sense. I love it.
Love it. See, this is why I do what I do. And people are like, why do you have all your online course and stuff? You have more than enough tutoring clients. I was like, because there's so many more people that need to know about this.
Right, for sure.
All the things I wish I knew before.
And it's a very untalked about topic, I feel, especially in education. Which is
one of those ones where, like, I take it for granted because I've been doing just this version of education, just dyslexia, for a decade now. And I forget what I used to be like, of like, oh my God, I didn't always do this. I didn't always teach this way. And there's just certain things where I'm like, oh, I did do this that first year to teaching because I had a really great Ms. Orendorf. I remember when we taught with her, she taught me some awesome strategies, and I really did do some of them. And I was like, I really was on the right track for a lot of things. But, I just expanded my knowledge even more. So I feel like that's my other little mission, is to keep expanding the knowledge of all the stuff none of us were ever taught in college.
Right. And for those of you, of course, you don't know Miss Orendorf, but she was an amazing, amazing reading strategist. All these years later, I have not found another person as dedicated and as focused to helping kids read and fill those gaps than her. She's just an amazing human.
I actually still have some of her teaching materials now that she gave me.
Do you?
Because they were actually really effective Orton Gillingham-based programs. I didn't know what they were at the time. Because she had all this knowledge, and as much as she shared with me, there was no way she could share everything in that amazing head of hers. And so I found some cards that were actually Orton Gillingham reading cards that were like the original ones from ages ago, that I'm like, oh my God, this is how I teach reading now. Like, she knew all along, but there's only so much wisdom she could impart with me before I left the school that we were at together. It was just so great to see that, yes, all these great strategies she was showing us, I did continue certain ones as the years went on, and, just added to my knowledge. So I just really want to help add to everyone else's knowledge.
What an amazing legacy that you're leaving behind, just like Mrs. Orendorf. I know you have some things for our listeners today. So first, you have a freebie dyslexia tip sheet. Do you want to talk a little bit about that for us?
Yes, it is just a quick, easy 15 different tips that are really easy to use right away that you can go ahead and download on my website. So it's parnelloeducation.com/dyslexia tips.
Okay. And I will make sure, again, everything goes in the show notes. So easy clicking access. And then you have, for our listeners, a 20% off any of your courses. So what types of courses do you have? I know you said dyslexia, but what are the titles, I guess? What are the specifics?
I have a few different ones. One is dyslexia for beginners, because most of us were never taught about dyslexia in school.
True.
And that was just a really low-cost $37 workshop. So the 20% off gets it even cheaper. And then I also have a writing booster workshop and a spelling booster workshop. And then
I'm interested.
yes, so I've got all of these different ones to try to be really within reason of, we know teachers don't make enough money. So I try to make sure all my courses are within a very reasonable rate for teachers. And so promo code is just an extra little thank you for all of your listeners. And then my really big course that I just did a launch of this past week is the Educator's Guide to Dyslexia, where it walks educators through like how to look at the reports and all the data and the numbers and which things to really look at when you're trying to place your students in groups and things like that. And, how to write IEP goals that are more friendly for a kid with dyslexia and what kind of goals you might want to write, and knowing all the different options and effective teaching strategies for dyslexia. So I've got a pretty big range of different courses for educators, just trying to help as many as I can. And sometimes it comes from requests. So people be listening to my podcast, like, hey, can you teach more about this? Or I would really love a class about that. And so that's actually where it comes from, is usually different educators and parents asking questions. And I say, oh, I can do that. That's easy enough.
Which is the perfect way to come about what you're going to teach. I love it.
Exactly.
So is there anything we didn't touch upon today that you really want to make sure our listeners are knowing?
I think the biggest thing is that kids with dyslexia are just as smart or smarter than the other kids in your class. And sometimes that's how they fly under the radar, is they're so smart and so clever and so personable. So for every weakness, there's an equal and opposite strength. And so I got the lovely pleasure of going to UCSF, so University of San Francisco's Dyslexia Research Center, and seeing the way they did fMRIs to see the way the brain functions. And wherever there was a weakness on one side, they had a really amazing strength on the opposite side of their brain. So this is how we get amazing founders and CEOs of major companies, just because their brain works so much differently. They get all these amazing strengths that are often underutilized at school. So a child who might be failing at school does not necessarily fail at life. It just means all of the things they're talented at are not really valued in the school system sometimes. So celebrating their strengths as well is a big one.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. I want to print that up, put it somewhere. That's such a good reminder. What a way to end the really good podcast episode. So, Lisa, I know everyone would love to get in touch with you because you are just a fountain of knowledge here. So where do you hang out the most, and where should their go-to be to find you?
Of course, I'm Parnello Education everywhere. So my main website, parnelloeducation.com, is where you can find podcast episodes and resources for dyslexia and my online courses. And then social media, Instagram, Facebook, those are the big ones. Facebook is probably more of the winner for me, maybe because I'm showing my age. Instagram wasn't as cool when I was younger. Or maybe it didn't exist.
Maybe.
Maybe. So I'm on all of those different resources. And so, yeah, just find me on any of them. Shoot me a DM, shoot me an email off my website, any of those things, because I love getting requests, because usually what is one person's question is actually somebody else's question they just haven't asked yet. So it is a great way whenever somebody asks me something, I'm like, oh, that'll be this week's podcast episode, or different things like that.
I will make sure to have all those listed out for you. Please make sure that you reach out to Lisa if you have any questions, even if you have a specific kid in class and you're not getting help. I know Lisa always there for the kiddos, and she will definitely help you out.
For sure.
All right, well, thank you so much. It was so good to reconnect.
It's so good to chat with you today and be able to be back together in our teaching conversation so many years later. Coming
I know,
full
right?
circle.
It should be way more often than it is.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. If you've loved this show, then join me in sharing the teaching,
hitting that subscribe button,
and leaving us a review on
iTunes,
so we can be found by more teachers like you who are ready to start sharing the workload. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Find new episodes each week on sharedteaching.com. Thanks for listening to the Shared Teaching Podcast. Okay, makes a lot of sense. I would like to welcome to the Shared Teaching Podcast, Lisa Parnello. Lisa Parnello is an expert with dyslexia, and we're very happy to have her with us here today.